Conditions May Apply by CinnamonPinecones. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 177. Shell Shock. Hitoshi nearly screamed in terror when he saw Izuku run off into the forest. The villains didn't scare him. Not here. Not with 4 pros in his line of sight. But Izuku, out on his own? That terrified him. Izuku would tear himself to pieces just for the chance that he could save someone else. He'd seen it firsthand at the USJ. He had no regard for his own safety when the people he loved were in danger. His tension didn't ease very much when Pixie Bob and Mandalay ran after him. He could see the sparks of Izuku's quirk crackling off into the distance. Even if he survived that jump, it was going to take the 2 of them a while to catch up. He forced himself to focus on maintaining control over the villain he had brainwashed as Sero slowly and carefully wrapped them up like a mummy. With how thoroughly swaddled they were by the time Sero was done, even if he did drop his control, so long as everyone stayed far enough away, the villain would have no way of fighting back. Tiger was still trying to take down the lizard man, and the rest of his peers were keeping watch, not heeding the order to return to the cabin until they were sure Tiger had the situation handled. Hitoshi looked around at the group and remembered the way he had just watched as Midoriya was brutalized by the Nomu at the USJ. All he did was watch. He couldn't do that again. He refused to do that again. Izuku had been too afraid to even leave the house after what happened at the mall, and after this, he couldn't imagine how scared he was. So, with all the stealth he had learned from Eraserhead this year, Hitoshi quietly crept into the cover of the trees. He was not going to leave Izuku out there alone again. Once he was out of earshot, he took off running. Of course, not 5 minutes into his sprint, he saw Izuku fly overhead again in the opposite direction. "You son of a bitch," quite literally. He cursed under his breath and pivoted directions. It looked like he landed a little closer than the other location had been, so Hitoshi was grateful for that at least. He still had to backtrack, but not as much as he thought he was going to when he initially saw the course Izuku was headed in. On second thought, that probably meant he hit the ground pretty hard. Maybe he shouldn't be grateful. As far as he knew, Izuku had never used his quirk like this before. He'd clearly survived the first attempt, but a second attempt might have been pushing his luck. The new clearing of broken trees he stumbled on after following Izuku's trail seemed to indicate that he was correct in thinking that his friend didn't have as much control over his ability as he might have liked. There were at least 5 trees snapped off at the base of the trunk, and a trail of disturbed dirt ending abruptly at the bottom of a much sturdier tree hinted at a rough landing. However, given that Izuku was no longer here, Hitoshi assumed it wasn't too bad. At this point, the trail had gone cold. He didn't know the first thing about tracking people through the forest, but he did know the first thing about tracking Izuku, so he followed the noises of destruction. If there was trouble up ahead, then Izuku must be up ahead too. He followed the noises until well after they went quiet, and though he was loath to admit it, he was damn near in hysterics by the time he heard a pained shout. Every second that Izuku was out of his sight was another second he had to do something stupid. He followed the shouting, and he could have wept for joy when he saw a glimpse of Izuku straddling a man frozen to the ground with 2 knives in his forearms. That was disturbing, but he supposed Izuku had a track record of doing disturbing things with knives when people were in danger. "Shinso, where's your partner?" Todoroki greeted him. He and Shoji were standing protectively between him and the figure whom he assumed was Izuku. It was dark, and his line of sight was mostly cut off, but really, who else could it be? "At base, I came to help. Is that Izuku?" He answered with a question because he needed to be sure. "Yes, the villain has Tokoyami and Bakugo. He can capture things in marbles by touching them," Shoji answered him. Well, that explained the necessity behind the knives in the man's forearms. Izuku looked up at him for a split second, and the intensity in his eyes gave Hitoshi pause. He was suddenly very glad that he had yet to get on Izuku's bad side. He was genuinely terrifying when he had the motivation to be. He felt foolish for having run out here to protect Izuku now. He clearly had the situation under control. Famous last words, he supposed. The moment he let his shoulders relax, even the slightest amount, everything went to shit. A portal opened, and before the figure on the other side even stepped through, a jet engine burst of blue fire shot directly at Izuku. No! A visceral scream tore itself from his throat, though the roaring fire likely covered up anything he said. Blessedly, he heard Izuku call out instructions from the other side of the villains for Shoji to retrieve a marble. When Shoji did, as he was told, and almost got his arm cooked off for his troubles, they all decided to keep their distance. The villains talked as the newcomer released the pinned man from his ice restraints, but it was all just static in his ears. He was freezing up again. He couldn't freeze up again. Who are you? He forced out the words with a shaky voice, hoping desperately for a response. He just needed a single word, just enough to sink his quirk in, and they wouldn't be able to hurt anyone, but the villains ignored him. Did they know his quirk? That shouldn't be possible. Everyone he used it on at the USJ was captured, and he didn't participate in the sports festival for this very reason. The first villain called Izuku a savage, and the second responded saying, "That'll happen when you grow up on the wrong side of town." Did he know Izuku? Was this one of the people who helped him when he was homeless? God, none of that mattered right now. What mattered right now was that one of their classmates was still in the villain's clutches, and Izuku wasn't going to stop fighting until he got them back. Who are you talking about? Why are you here? He tried to get a response again, but it was of no use. Todoroki sent a glacier of ice at the villains, and they didn't even bother to dodge. The second man's fire kept the massive attack at bay, seemingly without any effort at all. They continued talking casually, as if nothing had happened. With a snap of the first villain's fingers, the marbles burst open to reveal Bakugo in the fire user's clutches. He looked scared enough for Hitoshi to pity him. Tokoyami was sprawled in the grass behind them, but he didn't have time to worry about him right now. He had started sprinting toward the villains without even realizing it, but he noted quickly that he wasn't going to make it in time. None of them were going to make it in time. Izuku was too far away, and they weren't fast enough. Even though he hated Bakugo's guts, his stomach sank when he realized what was about to happen to him. He heard Izuku screaming, and Hitoshi was guiltily glad that he had been too far away to reach the villains. At least he was safe. He didn't stop sprinting, but he looked over to his friend as he cried out, and the sight he was greeted with hit him like a punch to the gut. Static-like vines of energy were coming out of Izuku's palm, and in the span of a second, they wrapped around Bakugo's chest and arms. However, when Izuku pulled back on them, Bakugo didn't budge. Instead, Izuku went flying toward him. Before he could even think to panic, the portal closed, and they were both gone. The three of them all stopped in their tracks, and the night around them became an oppressive silence. What happened? Where did they? Tokoyami's voice trailed off in broken questions behind him. He'd seen what happened just like the rest of them. He was just still confused enough to be in denial. No one answered him. They were all staring transfixed at the place where their classmates had just disappeared. There were lines gouged out of the earth from where those things that came out of Izuku's hand dragged across the grass. Izuku's scream echoed through his mind on repeat. Was it from pain or fear? Was it both? He'd had blood on his face and hands. Was he injured? Izuku was, God only knows where, tired, afraid, and injured, and Hitoshi had done nothing to prevent that from happening. He noticed the panic attack coming on about as much as he noticed anything else happening around him, which was to say it was distant at best. The grass rose up to meet his knees, or rather his knees probably fell to the grass. Yeah, that made more sense, didn't it? The dull pain shot up his legs, but it was just as distant as everything else, just as distant as Izuku was. At some point, he realized someone was trying to talk to him. Someone was holding his face and wiping tears from his cheeks. When did he start crying? The figure was blurry and worried, and they were crying too. Hitoshi went to brush the tears off their face in return, and somewhere along the way, he realized who it was. It was Uraraka, and she was bleeding. Her arm had a gash in it. He knew how to help with that. Eraserhead had taught him how to help with that. He rolled her sleeve up and went about picking off the bits of fiber stuck to the partially dried blood. It didn't take him long to realize he didn't have any bandages or any means of cleaning the wound, so he'd just irritated it for no reason. His hands were shaking, and Uraraka was just looking at him, patiently letting him screw up. "I'm sorry," he stuttered out as he met her eyes. The moment he spoke those words, the world came crashing back down on him. Izuku was gone. He'd failed, and Izuku was gone. He wept like a child and repeated those two words over and over again, as if he said it enough times the world might forgive him and bring Izuku back. It didn't, of course. Hitoshi knew it wouldn't, but that didn't stop him from whipping his attention up to the tree line when someone came running through, hoping against all logic that it was his friend. It wasn't, of course. Hitoshi knew it wouldn't be. It was Eraserhead. He looked desperate. He was heaving in panting breaths, and the sight broke him all over again. They had to tell him that Izuku was gone. That was his kid, and they had to tell him he was gone. Everyone around him was in varying states of shell shock, but apparently he looked enough of a mess for Eraser to gun straight for him. "He's gone." Hitoshi forced the words out when Eraser made it within earshot. "What?" he asked in horror. His step faltered, but he kept moving. "Midoriya and Bakugo. The warp villain from the USJ was here. They took them." Todoroki clarified Hitoshi's babbling, gesturing uselessly to the place the portal had been. Hitoshi watched every agonizing nanosecond of Aizawa's expression falling and being boarded right back up in a single breath. "Injuries?" he asked the group. His voice was hoarse from running, but Hitoshi could hear an uncharacteristic emptiness to it as well. Shoji silently gestured to the hand Hitoshi hadn't even noticed was missing. It was covered in a bloodied strip of fabric that had likely come from the bottom of Izuku's shirt. Uraraka shrugged her shoulder, pointing out the gash there, but everyone else stayed quiet. They were all standing. But Izuku was gone. "Get back to camp. We need to regroup," Eraser instructed him personally. He walked up to Hitoshi and offered his hand to pull him to his feet. It felt like the world was tilting around him as he stood and stumbled into Aizawa. He grabbed Hitoshi's shoulders to steady him, and he melted against his chest. He felt the man's arms settle across his shoulders as he cried into his capture weapon and kept repeating, "I'm sorry," over and over again. "Shinso, it's not your fault. We need to move. Come on." Aizawa spoke after a moment. He felt his voice more than he heard it, and he did his best to pull himself together. He was in front of his classmates, who had all gone through their own hells, he's sure, and Aizawa had just lost Izuku too. This wasn't about him. He needed to calm down. Aizawa let him go, giving him an unreadable look before he stepped away and started leading the group back. Uraraka linked her uninjured arm around his, and Todoroki fell in line on his other side as they all walked in numb silence. The mile or so he ran to get here passed by in seconds on the way back. It felt as though he blinked and suddenly they were back at camp. Ida ran up to him and was saying something, flailing his arms wildly the way he did when he was overly emotional in any way, be it excitement or in this case probably worry. Aizawa put a hand on his shoulder and shushed him, directing him to wait with the rest of the students gathered there. There were several students laying on the ground. Hitoshi thought they were dead for a moment, but their chests were still rising and falling, so he figured they were fine. It was mostly Class B students, but Jiro and Yaoyorozu were lying there motionless as well. He saw the adults gathered in the corner of the room, likely discussing casualties. A quick head count told him that there were only 2 students unaccounted for, though he noted that Ragdoll was gone too. With no one left to search for, Hitoshi presumed that she wasn't still out looking. 2 students and a pro, gone without a trace. He felt like he was going to be sick. Everyone, gather your things. Emergency responders will be here soon, and everyone is going to be looked over at the hospital. If you need urgent medical attention, please notify one of us. Aizawa addressed the group when their corner huddle broke up. Where's Bakugo and Midoriya? Kirishima asked without even waiting to see if they were taking questions. They were taken, Aizawa answered and paused for a moment. Please go gather your things, he directed again. The students were silent for a moment. He could imagine their minds shattering the way his had earlier. Almost at the same time, the majority of Class A started rapid-fire questioning what he meant, and Hitoshi could see his jaw clench. He was probably barely holding himself together right now, so he wasn't surprised when he snapped, "Enough!" Aizawa cut them off, his quirk flaring up seemingly by accident. He shut his eyes, forcefully, and rubbed at them with his thumb and forefinger. I don't have answers for you. Follow my instructions. Anyone with friends who were knocked out by the gas, please pack their things for them. He dismissed them. Vlad King was already talking to Shoji, looking at his amputated hand, and Aizawa walked over to Uraraka and picked up where Hitoshi had left off on first aid. Shinso, please get Midoriya's things together, he ordered. Ida can do it. I need to tell you something. He passed the task off. Ida looked lost. Direction would help him. Aizawa nodded and then looked at him, silently prompting him to speak. In private, he amended. Aizawa glanced back at the cut he was tending to. It can wait until you're done. He answered the unasked question. He held Uraraka's hand until Aizawa placed the bandage over the cut and sent her off to the girls' sleeping quarters with Sue to pack their things. After they walked away, Aizawa led him past several students loitering around, looking for answers, and into a separate room. He presumed this was where the teachers had been sleeping, if Aizawa's sleeping bag was any indication. Are you okay? Hitoshi asked once the door shut behind them. Aizawa looked at him like he was an idiot, which admittedly was fair. That was a stupid question. Is that all you wanted to ask? Aizawa responded without an answer. Your hands are shaking. Hitoshi responded without an answer as well. Aizawa looked down at his hands, verifying that they were, in fact, trembling before balling them into fists. Do they know? Does anyone else know he's your kid? Hitoshi pressed. He's not. No, they don't, he clumsily admitted. It occurred to him that he'd never heard Aizawa stumble over his words before. It was unsettling, but he ignored it. He had his meltdown. He needed to hold it together. I thought you could use a minute, he explained. Aizawa's jaw clenched again, and he took a deep, shaky breath in through his nose as he pointedly looked anywhere around the room that wasn't Hitoshi. He brought his still shaking hands up to his face and pressed his palms against his eyelids as he tangled his fingers into his hairline. He stood like that for a few shaky breaths before Hitoshi took a gamble. He stepped forward with audible footsteps and wrapped his arms around Aizawa's middle again. Aizawa was generally pretty standoffish, but he was also generally steadier than anyone Hitoshi had ever met, and right now, the man standing in front of him was certainly not steady. His whole body was tense to the point of shaking, and Hitoshi just hoped he wasn't making it worse. Aizawa rested his arms across his shoulders again and hugged him back hard, which settled his worries slightly. They stood there like that for far longer than he thought the man would allow, which eased his worries even further. After screwing up so royally, he just wanted to be of help to anyone. I'm glad you're okay, Aizawa said, his voice small. If he was getting a hang of Aizawa-isms, he's pretty sure that meant thank you. When Aizawa pulled away from the embrace, his eyes were red. He couldn't tell if that was from his quirk or if he was crying with eyes too dry to produce tears, but it didn't matter, so he didn't waste time dwelling on it. We'll get them back, both of them, he replied. Aizawa's face set with determination before he spoke. Yes, we will. I did actually need to tell you something, though. What exactly is Izuku's quirk? He asked. End of chapter.